And good evening and welcome to this combined order paper and the BFG podcast special with rebroadcasting affiliations with Paul the other one, since we decided to sit down there and give everything a big bang of an applause to sit there and go through there. Now this show has been specially brought due to the scrutiny week of the disability section with Whaikaha. I'm not going to be calling it the Ministry of Disabled People, because, you know, Whaikaha is what it should be, because that sounds a hell of a lot more positive. And so we're going to be covering what has happened through the whole thing there, with some jaw-dropping moments, because, I mean, and I'll be honest, I've not seen any of it yet, because some of us have business run. But I have been told that jaws have dropped in all sorts of things in order to make this show. And as you can see there, we've got Laura, who's on the screen there, and we also got Blake Forbes along with Nick Rani, who is joining us here. Now, I just want to ask Blake, if Paul hadn't gone on hiatus, would you have asked him first?
We would have been all together, but yeah.
So would we have been using Restream or StreamYards?
I have no idea.
Now, if you are watching the stream on Paul the Other One, feel free to send in some super chats. We'd like to know what happens if they auto-star when you go into Restream. I do know that they do that in StreamYards, but I'd love to see if they end up going in there. So if you are on Paul the Other One stream, feel free to send super chats.
And he may or may not be along, so we'll see throughout the night.
Oh, exactly. Now I've got someone who has just messaged me. Penalty for what? For indulging your children. Oh, God. Yes, apparently probably Louise Upson said if you buy takeaways, you should be benefit sanctioned. Is probably what I've guessed has circulated in the media. That doesn't sit there and surprise me. I remember prior to finding out I had dairy allergy, got questioned why I had chocolate milk in my fridge instead of normal blue top cow's milk.
Hey, is that for real? She's saying that you shouldn't buy takeaways.
Takeaways are a luxury. But see, here's the thing is, what is considered a luxury in a situation? Say you've just come back from the hospital, you've had a long day there because you unexpectedly was at the A&E, and you went and grabbed fish and chips on the way home with the Chinese. Why should you be penalised because you spent all day in A&E?
I mean, shitty day. You want some deep fried food? Sorry, you can't have that. That's a luxury.
Oh yes, but you can, will air fryers soon be taken out of beneficiaries' houses? There's all sorts that could sit there and happen in there. It's getting on there. So let's get to the panel and let's kick it off. We'll put it at 1.5 times speed. When something big comes up, that's when Blake sits down there and do it. And if you're on the partnership channels, Kiwi Scoot will be putting through the chats of the different URLs to the 3 different places. Please make sure you subscribe to all 3 of our channels. We need more subscribers. In the case of It's in the Ballot Productions one, we, for watch hours, aren't far off from being able to be offered partnerships, but we're still a long way to get to subscribers that would be able to allow you guys to do super chats. So let's kick off with what the first start goes with. Great to see an interpreter on the screen, and let's kick this all off. And the song is, why are we waiting? Why are we waiting? Waiting for the big bad news. I mean, it does sit there and say on there there's no words until 56 seconds. So that's when the transcript does start.
Well, good morning and welcome to the Social Services and Community Select Committee. Please take the opportunity to introduce yourselves and then make some opening statements, and from there we'll move to questions.
Before I begin my statement, I just want to acknowledge that we have New Zealand Sign Language.
Just to hold on, dropping to 1.25.
So I will be speaking at a pace during this and questioning time to ensure they can capture our discussion.
Thank you.
So, ngā mihi nui ki a koutou katoa, talofa lava ki o rāna warm Pacific greetings, ko Paula Tesoriero tōku ingoa, ko te timu whakarai ahau e te manatū Whaikaha. My name is Paula. I'm the Chief Executive of Whaikaha, the Ministry of Disabled People. My sign name is this, which is 2 bicycle pedals moving in a forward direction, representative of me as a Paralympian. And I'm sitting behind a table wearing a light denim blue collared jacket with a black t-shirt underneath and have short light brown hair. Thank you for the opportunity to attend the annual review hearing. I'd like to take a moment to introduce my 2 colleagues at the table. Ben O'Meara is the Deputy Chief Executive, Policy and Insights. And on my left is Ginny Baddeley, Deputy Chief Executive of Strategy and Enablement, and other members of the team behind me. At the start of this week, the Ministry of Disabled People, Whaikaha, became a standalone ministry. Today's annual review focuses on the financial year to June 2024. So my comments today cover the period when we held responsibilities for both the commissioning of disability support services and the leadership and stewardship for disability issues across government. Firstly, I'll make some comments about the commissioning of disability support services. During the last financial year, we supported just over 90,000 people to access disability supports, including equipment and modification services. We also provided disability information and advisory services to many more thousands of people across Aotearoa. Through Budget 2024, the government provided an additional $1.1 billion over 5 years, which included $80 million of in-year funding to address demand and cost pressures on disability services. This was in addition to the $2.2 billion per annum already invested. During the year, we saw the costs of delivering disability supports rise significantly, along with the increased demand for services. In March, we had to make some difficult and urgent decisions to ensure that we could continue to allocate funding in the most sustainable and consistent way. And we subsequently apologised to the community for the way that the changes were implemented. In April this year, the Minister for Disability Issues commissioned an independent review into the disability support system. Subsequent cabinet decisions led to the transfer of disability support services into MSD as a larger, more established agency. Alongside the commissioning of disability support services, we continued to focus on improving outcomes for all disabled people, tangata Whaikaha Māori, families and whānau living in New Zealand. Central to this is our work to progress the realisation of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities through the New Zealand Disability Strategy and Action Plan. We've provided advice, built relationships, and identified opportunities to advance those rights. One recent example includes the work to reduce mobility parking misuse, which has led to the government recently agreeing to significantly increase the fines for people who misuse those parks. This year, we worked with our colleagues across government to ensure that the response to the Final Abuse and Care Royal Commission of Inquiry report had our community's central interests in mind. That work saw us during the year contract for quality and safeguarding initiatives that hadn't been in place before to keep disabled people safe. Acknowledging that our community needs investment, we provided grants for disabled-led groups and organisations to grow disability leadership capacity. Together with the New Zealand Sign Language Board, we allocated just under 200,000 in community grants to maintain and promote New Zealand Sign Language. We've strengthened relationships between the New Zealand Sign Language Board and its advisory body, Turupu Kaitiaki, supporting the development of an action plan for Turi Māori, Māori Deaf. In addition, we've set up a number of community advisory arrangements to support our key work programs, created a data and insights team to improve data collection processes, and yesterday celebrated that we held a series of talanoa with Pacific disabled people, touching over 1,000 people, carers in Ainga, to develop a national action plan for Pacific disabled people. And then within the ministry, of course, we continue to set up all of our systems, processes, hire a very diverse workforce, where I was really proud that 42% of our workforce were disabled. We also led the Disability 4-point plan across government to increase the number of disabled people in the public service and improve their experience. And then this week, finally, we're also seeing the closing statements from the Waitangi Tribunal's Health Services and Outcomes Inquiry. We've engaged closely for the past year and a bit and look forward to receiving the findings. Looking ahead, for us as a ministry lies the opportunity for us to focus on the 1.1 million New Zealanders who are disabled, to make progress towards the vision of a non-disabling Aotearoa. Ngā mihi nui. Happy to obviously take any questions.
Thank you very much. First question, Camille.
Okay, so let's kick off first with commentary from the opening statements. Was that pretty much basically spelling out the facts of what happened over the past 12 months?
Well, for me, watching it back and watching it live, it was very awkward because she said a lot of things that she's been forced to say, because we all know she didn't want to make the changes. We all know the changes were forced upon her. We all know all the stuff that she mentioned and her opening remarks were forced upon her. Now, how much of that did she actually want? Probably not 95% of that she did actually want. Yeah.
Nick?
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I really, I mean, this is quite a personal thing for me, because I was definitely involved in the disability community around pushing for a very, very long period of time around establishing whaikaha. So I feel like this is a really personal discussion for me tonight. So I think the period of time in which we saw effectively the nobbling of whaikaha at the middle of the year felt really, really tough. And it felt like a real defeat and a real low point of this year, amongst many low points of this year for disability community. I think what we saw from Paula's speech there was trying to find some wins out of a real kind of, a really very, very tough year for disability community. But I think what we can really find out of that is the standalone ministry. I think that's potentially something that may, with support over time, be something that we can be quite proud of. But I think ultimately the overall message is that disability community took a real hammering this year. There's no question about it. You just can't argue anything sensibly against that. But I mean, Paula really laid out the laundry list of things that were achieved this year. And we will see through the other pieces that I'm sure you're going to go through the rest of this podcast. That there are many other things that we'll have to go through, but ultimately, the conclusion around this, before we even go into it, is that this was a very tough year, and ultimately a year on which we didn't achieve very much as a disability community.
Okay. Anything you want to say, Laura? I noticed you published a lot of fun facts.
Yeah, I did.
That aren't so fun.
Yeah, I mean, quarter of the population has a recognised disability. So, to fund Waikaha is very important. I've been looking at the data and seeing what they have delivered. There's a lot of potential for Waikaha. Hell of a lot of potential for them to do well. If they've got enough support from central government. I think some of the issues that I've seen is that Waikaha has underestimated the number of people that required individualised funding, because there's been a real increase in demand for that. And I don't think shifting over, disability support to MSD is going to help people as effectively as potentially Waikaha just did.
Yeah, I don't have confidence in that. I mean, I just see MSD making the wrong decision every step of the way, and I can see it where it's going to end up, unfortunately, having some cases having to be taken to the High Court. If there are any High Court judges who watch this show, if that does happen, please look at the option of waiving the fees that do it for the High Court, because otherwise it's just barriers. That it's an additional barrier on there for what someone who, in theory, shouldn't actually be fighting for in the first place.
Yes.
And sometimes
Yes.
you need a High Court judge to right the wrongs when you've got an agency that MSD is always right, even when they're wrong.
Yes.
Attitude.
I was just reading a newspaper article about a young man who lives up the road from me. He's in Woodville, and he had his funding cut. We're shifting away from Waikaha to MSD. He required care. He had funding cut. Why would you do that? Someone who has that level of disability. It's hard enough for people who are trying to benefit to navigate that, let alone someone who may have an intellectual disability or physical disability. It's cruel.
Yeah.
Okay, let's continue on and see what questions now get asked.
Good to have you in front of us, and recognising that you are still a very new ministry, and clearly there have been some challenges in the recent year. I'm going to start with DSS, and I just obviously there's a level of disappointment from some that DSS has not worked within Waikaha, but I just want to get some context here. Were there any issues that Waikaha experienced with administering DSS that weren't previously experienced by the Ministry of Health?
For the most part, what we inherited were those ongoing challenges. What was additional to those challenges was the need to, with some pace, build an organisation to support the provision of disability support services. So those wider supports were in place at the Ministry of Health, and while we had shared services with the Ministry of Social Development, we were then required to transition those into our own organisation and build the workforce to support. So things like the policy settings, the absence of levers, the rising cost and demand, those things were inherited and were always the case. It was the requirement of really building a new ministry. And also during the year, other things like floods and cyclones that as a new agency sort of hit us with perhaps a bit of a disproportionate impact in terms of supporting providers.
So you talked about, one of the big issues that Ministry of Health had that, of course, Waikaha inherited and then we're working through was the cost. And it had blown out under the Ministry of Health year on year on year. Then, of course, what we saw was that happened when it came over to Waikaha as well. Can you just, but there's one thing that you said, Paula, during one of your interviews, and that was that it would have taken another 5 years to be able to really embed DSS and to sort it out. I actually thought, well, if you could do it in 5 years when Ministry of Health hadn't done it for over a decade, then that would have been quite an achievement. So I just want you to speak to that a little bit.
Sure. I can't remember the exact context of the reference to 5 years, but I know I've used that sort of term. I think that what lifting the provision of disability support services out of the Ministry of Health did was really put the spotlight on both the challenges and the opportunities. And so we had a really good sense of what those challenges and opportunities were in a way that perhaps weren't so visible previously. And so with that in mind, it was our view that we could resolve some issues. I suspect that my comments really around how long it would have taken us was more about the building of the ministry to have the necessary infrastructure to support the provision of disability support. So I don't think I hope I would not claim to fix all of the issues in the system within 5 years, but it would certainly have taken us a number of years to build ourselves as a ministry and build the workforce that was necessary.
One of the big focuses of the review was certainly around financial capability of the ministry, the blowout with DSS. And as I've said, that happened in the Ministry of Health anyway. But what I wanted to ask you was whether or not there's been any conversations about the DSS funding being demand driven rather than capped, because clearly you have disabled people who are going to need equipment, who are going to need services. And so to cap it off or expect that you stay within an appropriation despite the increase in demand and the increase in cost seems completely unrealistic and unfair to disabled people. So have there been any conversations around that appropriation being demand driven?
So as far as I'm aware, the appropriation has always been demand driven, but with a cap. And so that's been the case for a number of years. And so what that means is that it was very, very difficult within a capped budget to ensure that we could live within our means while we were facing such a significant increase in both cost and in demand. Just over 4,000 new people received services in the year under review. And so it is very difficult to manage a demand-driven way of operating within a capped budget. And it is the case that it remains, at this point, a capped budget with demand-driven appropriation.
One of the key things that we had discussed with the Treasury during the financial year under review was the challenges of operating a demand-driven system within a capped budget.
Yes,
but one of the reasons why a demand-driven appropriation would have been challenging was that the level of forecasting that has in the past been done around the demand is not as sophisticated as would be needed to support a demand-driven appropriation. So over the past few months, EY, who a contestable contract for services, has been constructing a model that will enable much more sophisticated modelling of DSS costs. And that work started during the time that Whaikaha was managing DSS and has continued since it was passed over to MSD. And that kind of sophistication is needed in order to operate a demand-driven appropriation.
Just on the, I guess for this committee, when I think of demand-driven appropriations, where we don't always get it right and it can blow out, but there's no cap, it certainly benefits, and there's no expectation that that would be capped, and that's not always forecast to the greatest extent that it could be. But I guess there's an example there where that does happen. I am concerned, though, that, I mean, this year was the first year when it's blown out, even though it blew out previously under Ministry of Health, where we actually saw and heard from disabled people saying that their access to services and equipment was being cut, or that they were being told they were just not able to get their equipment renewed, or they were no longer able to get access to a service. Now, that's never happened before with DSS under MOH. Why was it this year that all of a sudden there were such kind of tight measures and capping exercised on the supports that disabled people could get?
So I think there's a couple of things to unpack there. The first is, you are right, that including within the year in review, there has been a history of either topping up the budget when the service sat within the Ministry of Health, and that came from the broader Vote Health budget, or it was topped up through cost pressure bids. And that's what happened in the year in review. So another $80 million was provided to Whaikaha to address those in-year pressures. We were very clear with the changes that were made earlier this year that it was not about changing the allocation of funding that a person had. It was intended to slow the growth of the spend on individualised funding, because it was the only area of spending where there was any lever. All of the other levers really go to the heart of big policy settings that the government would need to consider looking at. And so we made some changes to the way in which individualised funding could be used. We also, at the same time, we were experiencing really significant cost issues relating to the provision of equipment and services. And so what we had to do there was introduce a prioritisation framework so that those with the highest needs could access equipment and within the funding that we had available.
But that meant, Paula, that people could not get access to new wheelchairs when they needed them, and a whole lot of integral pieces of equipment. So they were effectively cut off from getting access to the types of support they would have otherwise.
It would be fair to say that there will have been people who, through introducing a prioritisation framework, may have had to wait longer than is the case. However, the $80 million of in-year cost pressure funding was to really help go towards ensuring that those with the highest needs could access what they needed.
Christian Kaurani.
Oh, thank you.
So, Carmel's questioning, trying to get to the bottom of it.
I found Paula's reflection here quite disappointing, especially the bits around people having to wait. I felt that her answer here could have been a bit better. I don't know how Laura and Nick feel, but I found the answer to be a bit disappointing here.
Yeah, for me, this issue goes to the very heart of what we've been dealing with since March 18. This is really the nub of the issue, and I think Paula really did her very best here. But ultimately, this goes much higher up the food chain within MSD, within Ministry of Finance. This goes right to the Treasury. And ultimately what we're talking about here is an appropriation that's not well set up to deal with the lives of disabled people. And ultimately what we're dealing with here is an appropriation that's demand driven, which basically means if you rock up as a disabled person and put forward a claim for a new wheelchair or a new set of equipment, then you'll be approved based on your application, but within that appropriation, i.e., the amount of money that's appropriated by the Parliament, there is a finite cap on that amount of money. So there is a cap on the amount of money that's available, and there is a tension there between a demand-driven system, but with a cap on how much money is available. And historically, we have been able to resolve that tension in terms of the overspends by just topping up the amount that's been overspent, and it's been done in a mature way by just topping up the funds quietly in the background, because ultimately no one wants to see anyone with equipment needs or with fundamental needs around their impairments not being declined, because who wants to be seen to be doing that? But we changed our government last year, and all of a sudden it becomes a problem because we transfer it over to MSD, and then all of a sudden that becomes a huge issue that then becomes a sorry, we can't do this. And then all of a sudden it surfaces because we've transferred the appropriation over to Whaikaha, who can't cover over the losses that they are seeing within the appropriation, and all of a sudden this becomes a massive problem. And this is fundamentally what happened on March 18. Previously, when it was in Ministry of Health, they could then cover over things within the accounting. And that's essentially what happened on March 18.
I mean, in response to that too, is there is a way how Whaikaha could save money, and that's to do with delivering early intervention services. The problem is those wait lists are so long, they haven't got enough people processing them. So what ends up happening is you get cases that become more and more complex and difficult to resolve. They can't be sorted out through early intervention services anymore. They've gone past that point. So and another thing I saw reading the data is there's not enough equipment to meet the money. They need a serious investment in equipment, and that cap is really holding them back from doing the right thing.
Okay, let's move on to the next round of questioning. We'll find out who it is.
So I just wanted to talk a little bit more about the March 18 part. So following the March changes to flexible funding, which were criticised for the lack of consultation, can you outline the Ministry's process for engaging with the disabled community and sector before implementing those significant changes? I mean, we hear over and over from our disabled communities, nothing about us without us. I'm sure everyone here has heard that. So I guess what have you learned from the feedback you received, and how will that inform future decision making?
Thank you for that question. So first and foremost, the involvement of disabled people and their families is critical to the work that we've always done and will do moving forward. We were faced with an unprecedented and incredibly difficult set of circumstances where we were facing an unprecedented deficit of between $50 and $65 million. And so some action needed to be taken. We had hoped that we wouldn't have to take that action, so we had spent more of our time focused on trying to ensure that we didn't need to take those sorts of actions. But in the end, we did need to. And I have apologised to the community for the way in which those changes were implemented. And it is absolutely my commitment that that will not happen again.
So just getting into what lessons and how moving forward so that consultation will improve. And I guess in hindsight, do you think that Whaikaha could have done more to involve the sector in that decision-making process? And I guess how will you ensure that going forward there is more consultation?
So I think there's a couple of things in there. One, we were also going through the confidential budget process itself, and so there were things that we were not able to consult on. That said, earlier in the year, in January, we did pull together and convene a meeting with a range of stakeholders to talk about various options that might exist if we needed to start introducing changes in the year. I think the critical thing, though, is the moving forward, which is that I don't want to in any way downplay March or the impacts of March. But what I do want to say is that in our short 2 years, we worked in a way that actually was quite unique for government agencies with the community. We had a tripartite board established to oversee the transformation of the system. We had the community involved. In some aspects, it was co-design. In some ways, it was advisory on all of our key pieces of work. And we know the importance of the involvement of disabled people. That's an expectation under the UN CRPD. It's the way in which we have worked, and it's the way in which we will work moving forward. There was a very particular and very challenging set of circumstances, but it is not reflective of the way that Whaikaha has and most certainly will continue to work in the future.
Supplementary.
Yeah, just on the point that was raised around consultation with the disability community. One of the big issues raised, Paula, was the fact that a review of Whaikaha was undertaken and there were no disabled people on that review panel. Now, I just want to ask you, as the Chief Executive, whether or not you gave advice to the Minister that there should be a disabled person sitting on that review panel.
The composition of the review panel was determined by the Minister for Disability Issues, and she developed a panel of people that she felt could give her the necessary advice in a relatively short space of time of what could be needed.
I guess, Paula, knowing you very well and the nothing about us without us mantra, I cannot imagine that the Chief Executive of Whaikaha would not advise the Minister that a disabled person should be sitting on that integral panel.
I will have to go back and check and provide an answer to the committee on whether I did provide that advice to the Minister.
Supplementary, Donna.
Thank you. Kia ora, Paula. Thank you for coming to speak with us today. Look, I just wanted to understand a little bit, as a supplementary to Kaharangi's question around the engagement with your community, disabled community, and just understanding a little bit about the process and the length of time it would take to engage across all the accessible formats required for your community, because I know that it is large and varied, and there are lots of, it takes some time. So I just think it would be useful to understand what that would look like in a best practice scenario and how long you would need to be able to deliver that.
Thank you for that question. So really good engagement and consultation with the disability community means that we need to provide information in a wide range of accessible formats, things like New Zealand Sign Language, Braille, large print, easy read. And there is a really increased expectation that all government agencies are doing that. And so there's quite a demand, therefore, on the services that we contract with to provide those accessible formats. And sometimes that can take, anywhere sort of up to 6 weeks to have information provided in an accessible format. So we work really hard to sometimes provide executive summaries and things in alternate formats if it's going to take too much time to get the whole document developed. But best practice would always have that consultation and engagement is done in those broad range of alternate formats. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll get some commentary while we wait for the Vimeo to actually do some downloading, because you might be hearing it we've got it probably a little bit too fast for the download speed.
I have a question for Nick. Why do you think Whaikaha did not consult the community in the sector before going ahead with the cuts?
Yeah, great question. The first thing I want to address, though, is I get really, really grumpy when our political leaders use the phrase "nothing about us without us," and it's a bugbear of mine, coming from the disability rights community, coming from a DPO leadership space into my current space. It just really, really grates with me when that phrase is thrown out there as a kind of a space to a phrase to just kind of throw out there. And I just really strongly encourage anyone who's not directly connected to our DPO leadership or our DPO space to just not use that term, because it's our term. It's our DPO term. It comes from us. It's directly connected to our DNA. And anyone that's outside of our DPOs who uses that term is just really just, not okay. But to answer your question, why did our ministry, our Whaikaha, not engage? It was probably political. They probably knew from their minister that there was not going to be a receptive response to having a disabled person on that panel.
Do you think they were strong-armed by Penny?
They probably read the room around, the minister wanted this person, and this person on that panel. I mean, Paula kind of indicated around, in that discussion that when she was asked by Carmel that why didn't you pitch up a disabled person for that piece of work? I mean, Paula's a very, very good chief executive. She knows her minister at the moment, and she knows that if she was to pitch forward the person who she knows would be the right person, and have that person be rejected, that would not be good politically for her to do, unfortunately. But that's just how things go. I feel like she wanted to say something in that moment, but ultimately she refrained from doing that on camera. But
But they also both know, her included, that both of those organisations, including incumbent government and that organisation, did drop the ball when it comes to consultation with disabled people. We can't sugarcoat that.
Oh, that's undoubtedly, you're absolutely right, Blake. And that's been very clearly stated by Whaikaha, that they didn't follow the process around consultation with disabled people. And Whaikaha has been very straight up with that they didn't do what they needed to do. That's absolutely right.
I just want to very briefly go back to your point about the nothing without us point of view. I actually appreciate that the politicians use it, because it shows that they are willing to fight with us. So for me, as a disabled person, I don't mind that it's used in that context. That's my personal preference. I actually appreciate that they use it. But
I think that's fine, Blake. But what I'm saying is that when they use it, when they don't understand where it comes from and what it means, it devalues what the whole kaupapa is behind it. And I think that's where the problem comes.
But I would rather that they use it than they don't use it, for me.
Well, yeah, of course. I'd rather they use it than they don't. Yeah.
I mean, I don't want to see someone sitting there grandstanding. Like the one that I've noticed is a number of people. This is the one that gets there. Is when people want to try and stop, say something like cycle lane, they drag the disabled people into the community, is a grandstand bargaining chip. But then when they actually sit there and put some of their things into perspective, they throw that person on the bus. Like the one I always sit there and mention is inline bus stops. Disabled people don't want inline bus stops. Disabled people want bus stops that are recessed off the side of the road. So when they sit there and get out their wheelchair, they fall flat into the curb and sit there and go, thank you for me. I don't want a cycle lane. And thank you, disabled people, for falling into the curb for making that happen. And it irritates me every single time that
It's
you have people
disingenuous. Yeah.
who do not understand what they're saying when they wave the disabled flag in ignorance. It's like put it this way: a bus having its ass hanging out on the road because the bus stop's too short is worse for a disabled person than an inline bus stop. It still holds up the traffic, but a disabled person can't access it properly.
That's right, Sam. I think we're perfectly capable of expressing how we view on a particular issue. We don't need an able-bodied person to do that for us.
And do it wrongly.
Yes. I would much rather that someone in opposition like a Kahurangi or a Whiangi used it than this current administration.
Oh, for sure, because she's
agree
being
with-
honest.
Yeah.
Like she believes in that statement.
Yeah. Okay, let's get to more questions for Scrutiny Week. God, tomorrow's going to be a long show.
Just to sup on both Kaihautū and Dana, it's since March, and I don't want to drag it back there, but what I want to be more sure of is from then till now, and I look at the communities, certainly the communities that I work with, Māori communities, Māori disability communities, are they with you? So given there was an apology, you said somewhere in that whole process, and having inherited the circumstances, and they were difficult. When those sorts of things happen, I think there's such a dive. And have you got their listening back? Do you think are they willing to trust again? Are they back in the game? Are they engaging? And are they providing their own solutions? And are they being responded to in the way in which you would expect?
We have great engagement from the community. I think your question about trust will ultimately be a question for the community. We will be working incredibly hard as a new ministry to ensure we have the trust and confidence of the community, but there's no shortage of engagement. And, groups really, our community wants Waikaha to succeed, and there's no shortage of expressions of interest to be involved in our work. We meet regularly with, we have a fairly large strategic advisory group, and part of that group separately meets as a Māori caucus to also talk about Māori solutions to the things that we are discussing. We have a range of projects for the year in review where, as I mentioned before, and even beyond March, people were at the table. People came straight back to the table after March, and we acknowledged what happened and moved forward. So, there will be work to be done, that's for sure. But the community are at the table wanting to be part of the future and make the most of every opportunity to improve outcomes for disabled people, and that's what our work is all about.
It's probably worth noting that the most difficult time to engage with communities is during the budget process. And so I think, if we had our time over again, and certainly the work that we did post the independent review recommendations coming out in advance of DSS being transferred to MSD, because it was early in the financial year at the time that those recommendations were implemented, we were able to talk to people about them in a way that is not possible during the budget process. So I guess, we're not managing DSS now, but the key learning that I would take from what happened is the importance of being able to discuss financial challenges as early as possible in the financial year, because once you get into the budget process, it is just very difficult for all agencies to share, financial challenges with the community.
Thank you.
Paula.
I felt, from what I heard from there was, and I might have heard it wrong, the disabled people forced themselves to the table. I probably have got that misinterpreted, but would something like that happen, where, say, you had Huhana literally beating the drum to be at the table?
The impression that I first got when I watched this show, and when I watch it again now,
Which basically means, someone sat there and basically ramroded the electric wheelchair through the front doors of Whaikaha to the meeting room. And Blake, if you did do that, please make sure you put a big glass shield, was it plastic shield that the police have on you before you sit there and do that?
Oh, and wear a Nikki No Boats t-shirt too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
The thing that I picked up around that piece of the discussion was just the sheer complexity around the engagement process for disability communities. And I think it's really, like most other government agencies do a lot of engagement, but they really don't understand the level of complexity that it requires to engage with disability communities. And I think really and for me, this is really a point where I am actually giving a lot of bouquets out here to Whaikaha, because the level and complexity of the engagement that they have completed over the last 12 months and even since they stood up has been unbelievable. And also when you factor in what happened on March 18 this year, they have still came back to community, and they've really listened and they've heard the anger that has come back from community. So, I mean, I think, despite how much angst there is out there in community and anger around what's happened, the people that are working inside the ministry are doing a hell of a lot of really complex work, and they're working with communities that are really complex and that require a lot of really complex engagement. So, I mean, this is my day job. I mean, I do community engagement with disability communities, so I understand the work that is required to do this work.
Yeah.
So I mean, I'm really supportive of everything they do. I also hold them to account when they do, when they don't get it right. But I mean, I fully back them, but also hold them to account as well. But I mean, they have to get it right. But we also have to hold them to account when they don't.
Does anyone get the impression that the guy on the side of Paula doesn't have as much empathy or knowledge for disabled as her?
I'm getting businessman vibes from him.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's probably the accountant going, "You can't spend that amount of money. Get back over here." Yeah. So
You're not balancing the checkbook.
Yeah, look at the accounting equation. Look at
the checkbook's not balanced. It's an overdraft.
So I just realised that I spelt Kaihautū incorrectly in the chat. But anyways, I think it's great that they've appointed a Kaihautū. Yes, Kaihautū to the board to advise because it's really important to ensure that Māori people are getting the services they need, and because the majority of disabled people in New Zealand are Māori, and a lot of them have intellectual disabilities as well. That's one of the biggest disabilities we have in New Zealand, and part of doing that. Listen, from a cultural standpoint with Māori, there's a key principle called manaaki. And so they're more likely to be empathetic towards those who are struggling with a disability than, say, someone like Imi Steve. So it's really important to increase funding and cultural services and community-funded services.
Yeah. Oh, let's get on to more questioning.
Yeah, this one irritated me, by the way.
All right.
Just a supplementary to Dana and the comments just made by Ben right now. Ben, I wanted to just go to the point of forecasting and clearly the need for a more sophisticated forecast system that you've mentioned so that we can avoid situations where there is such a large uptake and tracking. Can you speak a little bit more on that, please?
So we've seen a growth in the number of people accessing disability support services over time. And we could supply the exact figures to the committee after today, but last year the growth in the number of people accessing supports was around 4,600. and that was more than the roughly 3,400 the year before, and that was more than the year before that, right? So the things that we understand are driving this are that New Zealand has an ageing population, and there are some disabilities that are associated with ageing. And the other thing is that as disability is a thing that is more widely acknowledged, and I guess people within communities are able to identify as disabled, more people come forward for government support within the system. So all of these people are eligible. And in particular, we do have evidence that flexible funding, particularly those changes that were introduced during COVID-19, did result in more people coming forward for supports from the system. So those are the things that are driving the increase in demand for disability support services. Those are the trends that EY was working on to map over time, and to understand, because it's not as simple as saying, oh, there's 4,600 extra people, because what we need to know is what are those people accessing, what services, what's the mix of services, how many of them are have 24-hour support needs, how many of them are just looking for some of the lesser supports like carer support in the system. So I hope that helps.
Thank you. Thank you.
Just a supplementary from me. I actually want to acknowledge the work that Whaikaha-Ministry of Disabled People does for the 1.1 million people who identify as disabled in New Zealand. Yeah. And it sort of leads me to my question, which follows on from some of the earlier comments. So for that 1.1 million people, that's almost 1 in 5 New Zealanders. How many of those are accessing services from Whaikaha-Ministry of Disabled Peoples, and how many do you forecast will need to access or wish to access that over sort of the next few years?
So you're right. So 24% of New Zealand's population are disabled. And when Whaikaha was responsible for disability support services, so for the year in review, we provided services to approximately 90,000 people who are eligible for receiving disability support services, and that includes equipment and modification. So there's just over 50,000 who receive direct disability supports, and just over roughly 40,000 who receive equipment and modification services. Then on top of that, there are a number, which I don't have right in front of me, who receive child development services. So Whaikaha funds the provision of child development services. And then on top of that, a much broader number of disabled people receive disability information and advisory services, which are also contracted now through MSD, previously through Whaikaha. So not all disabled people, in fact, by those numbers, a much smaller proportion of disabled people need access to those types of disability supports, which Whaikaha provided. The rest of the work that is really, really important for the 1.1 million disabled people in New Zealand is really making sure that all of our mainstream services, that every government agency, local government, employers, business, community, the way in which society constructs itself is accessible to disabled people. And that's where our focus is on now, moving forward, to actually make sure that New Zealand is inclusive and accessible for all people.
What is a supplementary on that? Given that a lot of these, that education example, how many people are coming to your ministry asking for support when funding is available in other areas or other streams? And that leads on to what is your role in helping sort of provide a point of contact to direct to other agencies or organisations who can assist. That is not.
You're more a policy shop now, aren't you, Paula?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I'll answer both. So when the changes were made earlier this year to the purchasing guidelines, we did find that Whaikaha at the time was funding things that were the responsibility of other government agencies, and that really surfaced. And moving forward, as part of the work that MSD will now do, looking at the way in which flexible funding works, will be for MSD to determine. But certainly that did surface quite a bit, a range of government agencies that rather than accessing services through those agencies, people were using individualised funding for. Moving forward, our role in relation to key areas like education is to be working with those government agencies responsible for education, in the example that you use, to make sure that disabled children have the right experience at school. And yes, we have a policy function and a stewardship function, the provision of alternate formats across government, the provision of information and advice services across government, and a system leadership role. So that means working with all government agencies on really key areas that affect disabled people, because we've got a lot of work to do in that space.
Yeah, so the stuff is just going back to the reasons for why demand has increased. That's, in my mind, certainly not a bad thing, that New Zealanders know what they're eligible for, and that more are seeking out the support that they need as disabled people. Obviously, there is a cost that comes with that. So you mentioned flexible funding, obviously enabling good lives, individualised funding, all of that has helped raise awareness of what people are eligible for, and now you're seeing the demand. With the government's social investment approach, have you been asked to do an impact analysis or a cost-benefit analysis of the well-being, quality of life, ability to work lens, reduced hospitalisations with regards to those who have been getting that support, or when people get that support versus when they don't?
So you're right, demand has significantly increased. In terms of the social investment approach, we've not been asked to do that specific piece of work as Whaikaha. However, we are working with our minister on a forward work program for the ministry. I think one of the things that we have reflected on this year is that right back to the very beginnings, over a decade ago, to the very beginning of the rollout of Enabling Good Lives, while there was really, really good qualitative information gathered, during the pilots and over those years, there wasn't a good investment in quantitative analysis, which actually meant that we're in a position where we don't have all the answers to those sorts of questions, and we haven't done that piece of work for the year in review that we were responsible for those services.
Just really, thank you. Regarding the increase in demand, you talked about 3,400 to 4,600. Are you gathering data, or is there any way to analyse how much of that increase is as a result of awareness versus as a result of need?
I don't. I'm not aware of that information. I'll ask any colleagues whether.
I think the key thing about the system is that eligibility is assessed by needs assessment and service coordination services, which are contracted by the government. And so those who are receiving services are eligible for services. It's not a case that. So I guess what I'm saying is that there can be people out there who are eligible and not accessing, and those people can come forward. We don't know really why that happens. It may be awareness. It may be that the services, through things like Enabling Good Lives, are better able to meet people's needs, and maybe that people's circumstances change. So, for example, one situation that can occur is that family and whānau support can be a huge, what we would describe as a natural support for disabled people, but as parents become older and are not able to provide that support anymore, then that can result in more reliance on the system. So it's a fairly complicated interplay between natural supports and the system. Yeah.
The increased awareness. I was just wondering.
Okay, let's get back to some commentary here. Blake, you're probably one of those people in that boat. As time goes on, you'll probably need more support from the system because your nana and your mum are going to all get older.
Yeah. But my mum's not as old compared to my grandma, but I can.
You say no, she's quite a fair bit younger than 96. I do know that.
But yeah, so there's a bit to unpack here, so I'll try and do it as quickly as possible. I was disappointed by Paula's question about the forecasting, blaming the forecasting. I have to give credit where credit's due. I was really actually impressed with the chair's questions. I thought that it was really good to see that an MP from that side actually wanted to take the time to learn about a few questions. I don't know how Laura and that feel about that, but that actually, watching it again, impressed me even more. I was actually quite impressed by that. And Tanya's question was a bit odd.
Yeah, I've got thoughts about that one. I thought it was really weird. It's like, okay, Whaikaha has a cap on their funding. And she's sitting there going, where's your quantitative data? Have they got money for statisticians to go around getting quantitative data? I doubt it. They barely have enough equipment to hand out. Where are they going to get the money from to get people who do this for a job? Oh, okay, let me do the survey, let me collect the data.
Yeah, I mean, you raise a good point, Laura. I mean, this is kind of like a medium-term issue, I mean, the house is burning down, like right now, and we are kind of talking about medium-term issues. But, I mean, this is kind of like a serious issue, and it does deserve like a little bit of attention, because what we are talking about here is around unmet need within the system.
Yeah.
And within the disability community and sector, we have talked quite a bit about unmet need. And I think what we've seen, certainly over the last little while, and has been alluded to within testimony here, is that we're starting to see a lot of that unmet need come up through the system, particularly through young autistic people coming through the system and starting to present into the DSS system. And I think that's a particularly interesting phenomena that's starting to present just recently. But I think the point around starting to forecast what our future demand on the system is actually really important. And also starting to plan for what the EGL or the individualized funding system will look like in the next 20 years is actually really important stuff.
Yes.
It's not, it's not particularly, great conversation points, but it actually matters,
It does.
in terms of how we plan our systems.
Absolutely. You've got this government making cuts to admin positions. People that would go around, looking at all the data. And it's like, oh, those people are gone. Bye-bye. Oh, where's your quantitative data? Checkmate.
So those kind of points around quantitative data actually matter when we're starting to argue for budget bids every year. So I think having those conversations around how many people are we going to have in the system every year, they actually matter, unfortunately. When you're arguing for billions of dollars.
Yeah, you need more geeks. You need more nerds.
We do, because ultimately, that's how we're going to make decisions.
Maybe you could employ an autistic person to sit there and get this quantitative data. Considering
I'll do it.
Yeah,
I'm fully for that. Absolutely.
I know Linda McGregor sat there and said to me, there is going to be someone with autism is going to go out and look at the footage and count the number of people who attended the hikoi.
Oh, it's already been done.
Very accurate number. And she said someone is going to do it.
I can put my autism to good use. Give me the numbers.
So I mean, just to pick that point up, I mean, just around unmet need within the health system at the moment, particularly in relation to disability, we just have no idea how many people are out there right now who are not accessing disability support services. Yes. And Paula made that point. She said, we don't know, and I think we need to know actually how many people are going to access disability support services over the next 10, 20, 30 years in order to plan to fund for the services, not just the money, but also for the workforce in order to support those people over the next 10, 20, 30 years.
Yeah.
Because at the moment, we're just guessing, we're literally guessing.
And no one likes guessing.
No, guessing is not good, in order to deliver services, because ultimately that's what, when that happens, we get scenarios like we had this year,
Guessing is bad when you've got billions of dollars.
Turn the tap off when too many people show up. And we can't fund,
they do that to Lotto every time there's a big draw. They have to gatekeep the number of people going in so the site doesn't crash.
Yeah, so I'd much rather have a plan that's backed with data and evidence and forecasting, And I think we need to start now, actually, to forecast what's going to happen. And quantitative data is a better place to start from.
Okay, let's see what more questions coming up.
How that was impacting, whether there was more awareness and that was bringing people forward more.
I think absolutely awareness of disability has grown over time. There have been some changes over time that have provided greater access. So around about 2014, there was a change relating to autism, which provided greater eligibility. It often takes a while for awareness of those sorts of things to filter out to people. So I think that's I think we've probably provided about as much as we really know about the increasing demand.
I just have one more thing, just on the increase. Do you have the increase from last year to this year in age gaps? Do you know that?
Oh, we will be able to get information.
And can provide actually what the differences in ages.
Yes.
Supplementary, Laura.
Yeah, so much just subbing on the social investment sort of piece. I think that would be real useful work in the future. I know you're not in charge of that, but I think it's really important because we
I'm surprised no one's asked you to do that.
Yeah, we do know that when people aren't getting the services they need, they often shop in our other services more regularly, which costs us more long term. So on that note, what data were you collecting about disabled people, and how much of that has been used or can be carried over, or what work was going on as far as metrics on the needs or types of services, the whole picture as to what you were collecting?
You can kick off if you want.
So I guess that data on those who receive disability supports from the disability support system, we hold that data. But probably the more interesting question is the wider community of disabled people. And so what we've seen increasingly in recent years, and Whaikaha is building a stronger data capability around this, is what's called the Washington group set of questions going into many more agencies' data collections. And so that's enabling us to collect more data about disability. Obviously, the 1.1 million number that we're working with at the moment actually dates back to the 2013 census, and the 2023 census the disability survey associated with that will be released early next year. And so that's a huge opportunity for us because we will be able to use anonymised information to understand a whole lot more about people with disabilities than we do right now. So I think it is, particularly for Whaikaha going forward, our interest is in the wider cohort of New Zealanders with disabilities, how many of them are employed, how many are not, how many, what the level of educational achievement is, what the health stats say, all of that sort of stuff. And the data we have at the moment shows that disabled people are behind on almost all of those measures. And I guess, our focus for the future is how do we make particularly mainstream services that the government offers more successful for disabled people.
Two more supplementaries, Kaharangi.
Yeah, thank you.
Do we get to a new question?
Yeah, I've lost track of where we're up to.
Yeah, we're enabling good lives, and it's like, yay! Because this is something when talking to.
This is a primary question.
This is, well, I was actually talking about what has been discussed here about how to actually get those services out to disabled people, and in a way that they've been consulted with, and from what I've heard from our disabled communities, Enabling Good Lives is a visionary transformation for societal change, and has been an amazing piece of work that's been done in collaboration with disabled people. And I know that Whaikaha allocated 3.7 million for the disability transformation and positioning the Enabling Good Lives as a strategic priority.
Was that this year or last year's budget?
It was.
Did they get money this year?
Yeah, this year.
Oh,
yeah. So I guess the lack of progress in lifting the restrictions on the individualised care rates and expanding Enabling Good Lives sites has raised concerns for the communities. And so I guess I just want to understand with Whaikaha, the actual tangible process. Sorry, am I just?
You should just go on the new question.
That is a new question.
You go with the stuff off you.
You go for it.
No,
because
no.
No, your question is.
No, you just keep going.
Yeah, and then
Keep
we'll start
going.
off you.
How important all of us all.
For a chair.
How does Whaikaha justify that in terms of that tangible process, particularly in light of the pause of the national rollout, and how does the ministry plan to address the resource constraints that have hindered outcomes of enabling good lives and that individualised care that disabled people are saying will give them the autonomy to live those lives that they deserve?
Thank you for that question. I'll answer parts of it, and it sounds like there might be some follow-up on that. So the vision and principles of enabling good lives, there's sort of two ways to think about it. There's a set of principles, 8 principles, which ought to apply to the way in which any service and support that's mainstream is provided to disabled people. And so in respect of the role of Whaikaha moving forward, we've got a key role in working with other agencies to help them apply the vision and principles of enabling good lives. Then what can be conflated but is distinctly separate is the system response to enabling good lives with respect to disability support services is at its heart providing a personalised budget and investment in community capacity capability building. So there were 3 Enabling Good Lives sites. In 2023, Whaikaha drew down $73 million of funding that had been set aside on contingency, and a portion of that funding in the first year was spent on beginning the transformation work to bring that more direct approach to more people. So we invested in community capacity capability building. We set up the transformation board to oversee the spend of that money. We did a lot of the preparatory work around what systems and infrastructure needed to be set up. We also invested in safeguarding and some of the workforce issues that we needed to support the changes. The money for this financial year, following Cabinet's decisions in August, have been transferred now to MSD, and future decisions about transformation will be made by the government in due course.
Just to clarify, and I'll give it back to you, sorry, Kahurangi, that money from this year's budget was appropriated what year? Was it appropriated this year for Enabling Good Lives, or it was appropriated back in 2021-22?
It was originally, yes, as a part of the establishment of Whaikaha, yes.
So it was appropriated in 2021 or 22?
20.
And it's been taken off Enabling Good Lives this year and has been now pushed over to MSD to help manage DSS.
So it was 2022. The previous government put the money on contingency, and then we drew that down in that 22-23 financial year to begin the work. Yes, you're right that the funding now has been transferred to MSD, and that's in line with the decisions that have been made by Cabinet, because it is critical to the Minister that the current issues in the disability support system can be stabilised and managed, and she has been really clear that that needs to happen, and that decisions about transformation in the future can be made. So the funding that has been transferred to MSD will in large part go to helping to stabilise some of those issues in the current system that I touched on.
The DSS, not Enabling Good Lives.
Well, that would be a question that the committee could talk to MSD about.
I'm just reading the question by Kahurangi is a primary rather than supplementary.
I've got another primary later as well, if you can put me on the list, that's great.
Glenn, I think you had a supplementary off that.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I'm based in Taranaki, and we've got a really strong disability community. I meet regularly and champions of enabling good lives, and I guess want to see it grow and improve. But in terms of the work your team has done in the past year, what has been the feedback they've had in terms of the, I guess, the pilots, the rollout, and the effectiveness of enabling good lives?
Ben, do you want to make some comments, and I'll add to those?
The feedback that we've had from the sites in the time that they were managed by Whaikaha has been positive. The key thing about enabling good lives and the rollout since 2013, I think it is that there were 3 sites and they all operated a little bit differently. And so one of the challenges we were working on when we were doing this work was what does a nationwide model for this look like? And so as a part of that, we did some work which included supporting some work in Taranaki actually around a set of kind of community capacity building discussions that occurred for the next phase of the rollout. I think I'd go back to Paula's point because I think it's really important. Enabling Good Lives has to be about more than just the disability support system, though. It has to be about the principles and how they can be applied across government services so that disabled people are able to effectively participate really in all aspects of their life. So I think our focus for the future is going to be on EGL, not just in DSS, but more widespread.
Okay, let's give a halt on that one while we can sit and get more commentary. Otherwise, we're going to be going here all night long listening to stuff that's starting to make me yawn. And I'd probably say all of us do feel like we're becoming yawnaholics and don't need to go to Yawnaholics Anonymous meetings after the show.
Yeah, I'll give some credit. I've actually been, I don't know about Nick or Laura, but I'm impressed by a majority of the government-sized questions. I think
I would agree with you there as well, Blake. I do agree. It does feel like it's a fact-finding mission, not a patsy question drive. And that's probably because the people being questioned aren't ministers, they're CEOs of government departments.
What about you, Nick? I've been impressed by some of the government-sized questions. I think they're well thought out.
Yeah, I think probably some of the questioners around that are as uninformed as our ministry side, but that's okay. I mean, I'm just going to make some personal statements around this. I think that EGL is probably one of the most the biggest opportunity that disability community has over the next probably 2 to 5 years. One of the biggest challenges that we have is the reliance on government for funding and the reliance on delivering contracts back to government. And I think EGL really provides an opportunity to step away from government. And that's why I draw the link between what has happened in the Māori world, particularly around whānau ora. And I think there are significant parallels to be drawn and also learnings to be made between what's happened in whānau ora and also in enabling good lives. So I think if our disability world can link up with our Māori world, particularly through our tangata whaikaha world, we have a huge opportunity in EGL to do so much and to really chart our own path around how we deliver services back to disabled people, family and whānau. So for me, I'm massively excited about what this presents. It's going to take huge leadership and huge real guts around this one, because ultimately we're going to have to make an argument back to government that they're going to have to give us billions of dollars.
So it sounds to me that you're in favour of more like a community-owned approach. So having EGL owned by the community that utilises it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
I mean, I think it's clear, right? If you look at what's happened every time that government has owned funding back to disability community, it's been a total failure every single time. So I think what we're going to have is the funding go back to the community, just like it has with whānau ora. But one of the biggest challenges around that is ultimately going to be around building the capacity of the community in order to receive that funding and also to deliver it out. And that's going to be the biggest challenge over the next little while, because we're just not ready to receive it yet. But that's a challenge that I think community is up for.
It is difficult because when you look at community-run programs, it's like there's a bit of council involvement there as well, where they have to provide support in terms of funding and stuff like that. And of course, councils are ridiculously underfunded. But yeah, I would love for this program to be owned by the disabled community and their families for the disabled community and their families.
Yeah,
I know I did a socialism, but that's how I roll.
If we can get into that space where funding comes back to disability community, and then is distributed back out to disabled people, family and whānau, I think that's ultimately the best place where we can end up. And less government involvement in our lives. And I speak as a on the left of the spectrum, but ultimately that's where we need to be.
Yes, similar to a Māori model.
Exactly similar. Yeah.
Okay, let's continue on to hear more.
And Paula, I understand this is out of your hands in terms of what's happened with Enabling Good Lives. But I guess the question, you said earlier about never again will you, in terms of the consultation process, happen how it did. I guess in terms of what you'd say to those communities in terms of enabling good lives, in terms of advocacy from you as a ministry to ensure that if it doesn't continue, what work can be done to ensure that, the whole nothing about us without us will continue?
Well, I think even just before that, the rollout stopped, hasn't it? It's paused. It has paused, so it's not even happening at the moment.
So the pause of the way in which disability support services is delivered through an Enabling Good Lives approach, has paused. The minister's made it really clear in her statements and in the decisions that Cabinet have made that the government remains committed to the principles of Enabling Good Lives.
All right, the last supplementary was
Thank you so much. So I know that Whaikaha had signed agreements basically to advance Enabling Good Lives, and it sounds like that is going to be something that not only Whaikaha might do, but it might be an across government thing, which is
okay, that's interesting.
The dream. I guess what we've heard from
so when you
the
click on
community is that there is a lot of confusion, and I think there's a bit of confusion generally across the board. So what is Whaikaha doing to help address that confusion among providers and disabled people regarding access to funds and services, particularly in the context of the pause and delays stemming from the independent review and the challenges of resourcing, Enabling Good Lives for that full rollout?
Oh, well, I think there's a couple of things. One of the new responsibilities that we have as a ministry is to provide an integrated source of information across government for disabled people. So that will see us in future as we build this to be able to sort of help people navigate their way across a range of government services. So we'll have a role in that. And we also have a really critical role in upholding the principles of Enabling Good Lives as an organisation ourselves, and in working across government to promote and raise awareness of the principles of Enabling Good Lives. And very recently, the team had a conversation with the National Enabling Good Lives Leadership Group about, well, how moving forward might we do that together and raise that awareness across government agencies.
New question, Māori.
Yes, kia ora. Māori with disabilities. Can you just talk a little bit about your strategy to, in a cross-sector way, addressing inequities, especially inequity for Māori? Need to know what you're thinking in your strategy and your planning is, Paula, in that way, particularly for Māori with disability.
Thank you for that question. So we had the privilege this year of appearing before the Waitangi Tribunal and as part of the Y2575 kaupapa inquiry, and really acknowledge that there is much more work to be done to achieve equitable outcomes for tangata Whaikaha Māori. What Whaikaha is really committed to doing moving forward is building on some of the good work that we've started. So in terms of building ourselves as an organisation, in order to do that work well, is we established the role of a Kaihautū, Ronelle, who is here, and our Pauarehi, to really help guide me and the leadership team to ensure that we're doing what we need to do. We have, as part of our forward work program, building a cultural capability within the organisation, because everyone in the organisation has a role to play in improving outcomes for Māori. We also next year, we'll be beginning the work on the refresh of the New Zealand Disability Strategy, which is will be out of date next year. And that's a really big opportunity to be engaging with all disabled people and to be working out an approach with Māori about how to ensure that there is a much greater visibility of the needs of tangata Whaikaha Māori in that strategy, because one of the criticisms of the current strategy is that Māori are less visible in it. So we're absolutely committed to making sure that that changes in the forward-looking strategy. So I think that's probably what I can say for now in relation to our forward.
So if progress beats process, is if strategy is important, plan is still important, and then but progress is the most important. As these things develop, it's like in my mind anyway, and certainly what I hear from our tangata haiola and mana haua and the groups, particularly in Te Kaitōkera anyway, is and in the meantime, what's happening then? You know, in the meantime, these inequities, they just pile. They pile because we're Māori, and then they double jeopardy as they pile because we're Māori with a disability. So in the meantime, how can we enable anything? You know, it sounds good. It's the application of those things. And that's what I mean by progress versus process.
Yep.
How do we get that landing on the ground? So things are visibly, tangibly, and actualized in the today. You know, as close as today as it can be. I kind of want to. Can you just give me more?
For us as a policy agency going forward, one of the main things we can do is to make the circumstances in situations of disabled people, and in particular tangata Whaikaha Māori who have worse outcomes than other disabled people, really visible and apparent, and to identify the things that we think will improve that situation. I guess that's really our role, is to use the data and evidence that's available to keep these issues in the front of people's minds. You know, that's really the role of a policy agency, and to try and identify what the best solutions are for that, and to work with other agencies who do have that implementation responsibility to make sure that they haven't, that disabled people are front and centre for them. Yeah.
Thank you.
New question, Dana.
Thank you. My question follows on a little bit from Nina's question, and it's about the NASC service and the assessments. And I guess my question is, well, a number of questions, but let's start this out. So what are the challenges with the NASC assessments currently?
Sorry, can you?
So, all right, well, let me just contextualise it a little bit. So if you're from a region, in a long, as Māori Mena was saying, if you're from Kaikohe, or if you're from Oporiki or Rotorua, and you are trying to get some help and some assistance, the NASC system is challenging because you cannot, this is what I hear in my electorate, which is East Coast, so lots of rural, isolated Māori communities and Pakeha communities. But so my question is around what are the challenges, because it's difficult to get an assessment. I'm not sure if there are wait times that you can tell us about what the average wait time is, but I have some views on that. And also, how can that be improved so that it is meeting the needs of people who are in this space but can't access any help because they can't get an assessment?
So
Lots of questions, sorry. I tried to do it one at a time, but it just didn't work.
So thank you for that question. I think it's really well understood that one of the key challenges with NASCs has been sort of variability across the country in approach, and part of that will be access to services in more remote parts of New Zealand where there are less services available. It can be difficult for NASCs to allocate services. I think that there are a range of improvements that can be made, but what I want to be really mindful of is that this is now the responsibility of MSD, and so really happy to answer questions during the review period, but I think that questions about the future improvements for NASCs should be directed to MSD. Certainly the Minister has talked about consistency and stability being of key importance, and NASCs are a critical part of the delivery of disability support services. So the work that MSD are now doing to stabilise things will inevitably be working with NASCs. So I think that is a question that the committee might consider talking to MSD about.
Thank you.
I think commentary is required. I don't think MSD are going to sit there and help stabilise the situation. Past experience speaks volumes. That just shows they will create chaos when chaos doesn't need to be created.
Mm-hmm.
The thing that got me about that segment is right at the beginning. If they're committed to enabling good lives, why did they pause it?
Well, there was one that got put, a comment that got put up here, and I really liked what it said. Where is it? Penny pause and Louise pause. Here it is. Penny pause, then Louise pause, lol.
True.
And if you actually want to sit there and do a shirt for Whaikaha, the Penny paused it, and Louise continued the pause or something like that. That could be quite a good shirt that they could put out there as the Penny paused it.
Yeah.
I'm sure we can work something out, Sam. You know me. I illustrate a lot.
Yeah.
Maybe we have to start making our own. Maybe we have to start making our own merch. Oh, my dyslexia's on fire tonight.
Yes, you got to figure out how to make that work. Yes. Okay, let's continue to more questioning.
So do you have the figures for wait times from this previously?
So there's a service specification that NASCs work to as to the number of people that they will see from memory within 20 working days, and how they will progress the process of assessing eligibility and allocating supports, and those are reported on within the disability support system. So that's how that works. We don't have those with us today, given MSD now looks after this, but we do have the stats from the last financial year, which you can ask us about subsequently if you.
Yeah, I've got one on the NASCs.
Sure.
Yeah, and this is specific to the last financial year. In your non-departmental output expenses, when the section connecting and strengthening disability communities, one of the performance measures is all new clients assessed as being eligible for Whaikaha funded support are provided with that support options within 20 days of assessment is greater to or greater than 85%. And then, I think it's 85%, but then that wasn't achieved. However, there's a note to say that the standard was not met because, but 12 NAS exceeded the standard, and the median was skewed by a NAS that is operating significantly below the standard. I think, the select committee would be quite keen to know which is the NAS that is performing significantly below standard.
I don't have that available, but
We'll have to come back to you.
Yeah, we'll have to come back to you.
Okay, that's kind of important
In your annual
information.
report.
The name of
Whoa.
No,
Sorry,
no,
was it
That's
there?
in the annual report.
So
Yeah.
you would think that
They don't know which one of the, 12 NASCs, they don't know which one is the one that's struggling. They don't have that data. That's not good.
No, they know. They just don't want to say on camera.
That bad, is
would
it?
you have an idea which one's lagging behind?
Yeah, no, they know which one it is, but they just don't want to say it on camera, so they're going to provide it with an answer off camera, and it will take about a month to get back to the answer.
Jeez, it's that bad. Okay.
That's how it works, that's how these things work.
Yep.
So can you get the name of
Sorry, that's not very transparent if they don't want to say it on camera.
True.
Yeah. All right, let's continue moving.
that NAS? Because I think for public transparency, it would be good to know who that is.
And I'll just ask a supplementary, it's sort of broadly related to this. Consistent feedback I've had across many schools is that there's been a rise in complexity of need of students presenting at school, coming from very entrance classes. I'm wondering, has that come through to Whaikaha?
Yes, absolutely. We saw when we were responsible for disability support services that the range of complexity increased, and we saw that with young people, and we're very conscious of in discussions with education officials and others as well that is the case.
Okay, I've got that one. Yeah, so my question is in relation to the shift of DSS from Whaikaha to the Ministry for Social Development. Obviously, the intention is that this works better for disabled people. How confident are you that the lift and shift from Whaikaha to the Ministry for Social Development is going to result in far improved disability support services for disabled people?
So I think that, I've sort of often talked in the latter parts of this year about the fact that we still had, 30 years of building the ministry. We started with approximately 140 staff at Whaikaha, and significantly increased in the period of review our number of staff, and we're working on all of the systems and processes and infrastructure that we needed. But inevitably, that would have taken 30 years to really fully develop that. The benefit of having disability support services inside of MSD is that as a large agency, the agency already has all of that infrastructure. They have the commercial backbone, the contracting practices, much larger financial capability and resource to wrap around the services. And that's a key rationale for the government's decision to move disability supports into MSD.
But Paula, you were already a departmental agency hosted by the Ministry for Social Development. Your appropriation effectively sat on the books of MSD anyway, is my understanding. And so as a smaller government agency, your own ministry though, with your own CEO, you had access to all of the supports to try and make DSS work. And so now effectively, it was effectively in some ways with MSD before and now still with MSD. I mean, you were in there.
I think you're right, we were a departmental agency. However, firstly, it is really important for everyone to know that the funding for Whaikaha could not be topped up from within the rest of social development. So that was not an option. The funding, when we were established, was kept very separate. So it wasn't as if MSD could shift some funding around and apply it to disability supports. That's a little bit different than when the funding sat within Vote Health, when the Ministry of Health could make those various adjustments and did make those adjustments over a long period of time. So that's one significant thing to be aware of. I think the other thing is that I think when you are directly accountable for a service, as MSD is now, it's able to make all the decisions that it needs to make as a very separate independent agency. When you're a departmental agency, you have the resources that you have, and we had a shared service arrangement with MSD. But ultimately, I think when you're fully accountable for a service as MSD is now, you can apply the resources of your entire agency in the way that the chief executive of MSD can now determine how she will do that. And I think that's different from being a departmental agency inside another agency, where you're also critically dependent on Health NZ and its infrastructure moving forward, as well as MSD. So I think there are some differences.
Well, I think we'll need to put to the CEO of MSD what capacity they have to apply their overall resources now to DSS, given that they seem to have their own constraints as well. But I guess that's a question for the CEO.
Sure.
My one other question on this is, what feedback have you received from disabled people about the transition or transfer of DSS from Whaikaha to the Ministry for Social Development? Because we've received a lot and it's not very positive, and they have real concerns. Have you received the same feedback?
Yes, we've received feedback in a couple of ways. So one, yes, absolutely, we have received feedback about the concerns that disabled people have about disability support services getting lost inside a large agency, and concerns that the services are no longer delivered by Whaikaha. We've also received some positive feedback about the opportunity for the ministry to be able to focus more exclusively on strategic policy and cross-government work. But yes, we have received concerns.
There were some disabled people who felt that Whaikaha, being a service delivery agency as well as an agency that was seeking to promote the wider interests of disabled people, sometimes put us in a position where we were doing dual roles that could be in tension with one another. So that is certainly a point that has been acknowledged to me in the time that I've been in this role. And so now our relationship with DSS is the same as our relationship with other government services. And it means that I guess we can stand apart in terms of being able to bring evidence into those conversations.
I'm sure you've got advice on both sides, but was the feedback you got from disabled people weighted more towards being opposed to the shift into MSD or being supportive of it?
I think that's a difficult question to answer in a way because as I think that disabled people were disappointed in the way that we had to progress the March changes, and so it's been a very complicated year in terms of the relationship between the community and DSS generally. Yeah.
So supplementary on that, just in your forthcoming status as a public service department, what role will you have in relation to the shape and delivery of DSS, and how will you implement that?
So we have a system leadership role and a system monitoring role. And so we're working through now with our minister moving forward about how we will be, what frameworks and things we'll be using to report against the outcomes across a range of government agencies who deliver disability supports, and whether, how the outcomes are being delivered. So we'll have that sort of oversight role at a very high level.
Supplementary data.
Just a supplementary there. So
Okay, I think we're time to have a bit more commentary, and I'm going to see if I can try and track down Louise Upston clip.
So my main concern is that a lot of this shifting it to MSD is designed to really put a hurdle in front of disabled people from getting the help they need. I really do get the impression that this is just the government's attempt to say, hey, look, we made cuts and saved money.
The gentleman's comments that were doing the answering was terrible. Oh dear.
Yeah, a few points here on this one. Ben made the comment that that disabled people had expressed the view that that they were happy that the Whaikaha had transferred their function over to MSD. I had that comment delivered to me because there was a concern.
I mean, who is saying that? Which
Yeah.
disabled people?
Probably the same people who sit there and say disabled people don't want inline bus stops because they like people to fall out of wheels.
No. Seriously, like people that come up to me and said they didn't want Whaikaha to turn into a ginormous service provider. And I can understand that. I can understand that sentiment. So it's a nuanced comment, but it was delivered directly to me, and I can understand why. But on the other side of that, there is the position that, because there is a lot of tension in the disability work between our service organisations, our service providers, and our representative organisations. So I can understand why people would take that position.
I can understand that coming from a service provider, but from a disabled person who just wants to get help, I am struggling to understand which demographic disabled people are saying, wow, I'm really glad that Whaikaha doesn't provide everything.
Yeah. Anyway, I'm not going to name names here, but I'm just saying
that's all right.
There was a
You
position.
can name names in the private chat, and we'll keep it to ourselves.
Okay, all right, maybe later. but the other position that I'm also thinking about here is fundamentally when MSD's position around contracting is to put contracts out to the market to deliver services or to receive services back to receive the most amount of service or outcomes back for the least amount of money delivered or spent. They have a very kind of capitalist kind of right-wing view on how to deliver service. So now that we have handed a large amount of disability support services over back to MSD, we're really changing the way that disability support services are going to be contracted back out to the market. And I'm not sure really that that's widely understood.
Hey, I mean, you went from Whaikaha being the one-stop shop to now MSD being the one-stop shop, you just
Yeah.
basically got a worse version of what you had before.
Well, I mean, when Whaikaha was contracting, they had a really interesting way of contracting with the market. Their way of contracting was new, and it was very kind of. They had a particular way of engaging with our service organisations and our disability organisations that was really built from the ground up. And it was totally different from almost anything that was going on in government, and it was quite different. The way that's now going to take place over at MSD, like literally one floor up within MSD, because it's literally like they're literally changing floors, same building. It's going to be totally different. They're now going to be focused on achieving the maximum amount of outcomes for the lowest.
Yes, and we all know how that.
And we all know how that story ends, right?
You added a bureaucratic hurdle. Now you've also included a physical hurdle because it's one story up.
Exactly. Yeah. So we've totally changed the story around how we contract for disability support services. And it's great for the bottom line, but ultimately our disability community ends up, on the west, on the bad end of that story. But the column, the profit column looks a little better. I think ultimately disabled people end up worse off as a result.
I'll tell you
of this change.
what my fear is. My fear is that the same thing that happens at WINS is going to happen to disabled people who access the new disability services. They're probably going to walk in and go and be met by, "Are you sure you're actually disabled enough? We don't believe in your doctor."
Yeah. Yes, that's what I'm saying. Now we got the minister,
the lady herself.
Watch it. Coming here till 1:20, Jennifer.
Good morning, Minister. Welcome to the Social Services and Community Select Committee. Please take the opportunity to welcome your team.
No, I think it's another one.
Make a brief opening comment and then we'll move to questions.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I want to start by acknowledging the Chief Executive, Debbie Power, who's sitting to my right, does a fantastic job of leading MSD, and the Deputy Chief Executives who are here today, Viv Rickard, who looks after service delivery. If you can wave when I name you, Simon McPherson from Policy, Marama Edwards, Māori Communities and Partnerships, Sasha O'Day, who looks after Strategy and Insights, Tracy Boyce, I'm not sure you would have met before, from Transformation, Nadine Kilmister for People and Capability, Melissa Gill, Organisational Assurance and Communication, and also a new addition to the team, Chris Bunny for Disability Support Services. So because the session is obviously the annual review for the 23-24 financial year, I'll be focusing my answers related to the year completing 30 June 2024. And I do want to acknowledge some of the work done by MSD during the year in review, where they supported 71,000 people off benefit and into work, answering close to 4 million phone calls, funding community support services that were accessed by over 135,000 New Zealanders, processing 242,600 student loan and student allowance applications. This is on top of all of the work that's well underway to have 50,000 fewer New Zealanders on a job seeker benefit by 2030. This is our government's focus because we believe the default position of our welfare system should be that if you can work, you should.
Yep.
And this is because we cannot afford the social and economic cost of large-scale welfare dependency. And actually that has a significant human cost as well. At the end of June 2024, there were around 380,900 people receiving a main benefit and around 196,400 receiving job seeker support. The latest Benefit Insight report estimates that people under the age of 25 on a main benefit will spend on average about 20 more years on benefit over their lifetime. In February, I made my expectations clear that benefit sanctions should be fully applied to incentivise job seekers to fulfil their work obligations. This year, a suite of new kōrero maki seminars were also introduced. They are the new business as usual and a key part of our efforts to make sure people on benefits are engaging more regularly with MSD and actively taking the steps they need to find work. The Let's Talk Work seminars are for people who are new to the job seeker support and are work ready but not in case management. They occur within the first 2 weeks of their benefit starting. Job seekers learn about the employment support that is available to them and get one-on-one help to plan their next steps for finding a job. The work check-in seminars are for those still on job seeker support after 26 weeks. MSD catches up with them to discuss what progress they have made to find work and check what support if they still have additional needs. There is much more work ahead of us as we implement our Welfare That Works reforms.
But I do want to acknowledge the amazing work done by MSD already over the past year. I also want to acknowledge the work that has begun on reviewing the accommodation supplement and the role it plays in supporting lower income households. This will include looking at the zoning issues that limit how much financial support some people can get in areas where there has been rapid urban expansion, and Queenstown is a good example of this. Our government believes it is right that the accommodation supplement exists as a safety net for those who are really struggling, but there is merit in considering whether the settings for the support are fair and sustainable long term. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm happy to answer your questions.
Thank you. First question, Carmel.
Okay, how do you think our opening statement went? It seems to be like,
all I got from that was bash beneficiaries, bash beneficiaries, bash beneficiaries. Look at these people. They don't know how to find a job. Bash beneficiaries, bash beneficiaries. Forget about the fact that they may have qualifications and they can't find a job that matches their qualifications. Let's keep bashing them.
No, we won't have time to get to all of it, but she keeps... I will warn you that she jumps back and forth between this and Whaikaha if you want to watch it later.
Oh, God.
I love how she quoted a weekly beneficiary report, a benefit report that MSD publishes on its website, which is now not available, which has now been pulled because they've fired so many staff that they're now no longer able to publish the report. So that was nice of her to quote a report that's now no longer available to be looked at.
Yeah.
Oh, well, that's very convenient.
Let's start listening from Louise.
Thank you for being here. I know we don't have much time, so we'll try and ask very quickly. And we've been given limited stuff so that we can get more questions through. So my question's in relation to the 50,000 fewer people on job seeker support target. And firstly, just making the point that when the targets are reported on, this is the one, I think it's the only one that seemed to be at risk of not being achieved. But secondly, going through the annual report, I see that in at least two places, there's going to be a reduction in terms of targets because of the economic conditions and those employment outcomes interventions not being able to be achieved. And so I'm wondering how you reconcile that a reduction in the targets with this, as the Prime Minister has said, very ambitious target of reducing beneficiary numbers, which is looking less and less likely to be achieved.
Yeah, so thanks for your question. So absolutely, it's ambitious, always has been. The status as of Monday on that went to orange, amber, red, which means that it is at risk. There are other targets in that status. But basically, it doesn't change what we're doing in terms of the initiatives that I mentioned around the expectations, around obligations and consequences, initiatives like the Kōrero Mahi, which really help people at the start of their job seeker journey to understand, firstly, what their obligations are and also what support is available. And the important thing is being able to connect people to the support that they need. So we know that case management is one of the most effective interventions, which is why we've seen an increase in people receiving case management. And again, that is all about how do we provide that one-on-one support to ensure that we can deliver the intervention that someone needs. And if I think about the 50,000, a big part of the challenge is the high number on job seeker benefit when we came into office. So halfway through this financial year in review, I wonder why the numbers were already high. And that was curiously at a time where the unemployment rate was low. So we now have a double challenge of pre-existing high job seeker numbers, now with rising unemployment. And so we do know those numbers will continue to rise. The BFG forecast from Treasury was that they would peak in January.
Okay, with all due respect, it was.
Okay, and just something to also point out there, thanks to the previous national government, not the one that's currently in now, merged the sickness benefit and the job seekers benefit together, so your job seeker numbers are artificially inflated because half the people, if not more, are on medical exemptions of some sort.
There are a lot of people that shouldn't be on job seekers and they should be on supported living. It is absolutely ridiculous. There needs to be a full-scale review.
Okay, let's hear.
A lot I could say.
Yep. Louise, you can continue.
It was a pretty specific question. So it's employment interventions. The target is going to be set lower, and yet your target for getting people of benefit remains ambitious. I'm finding it hard to reconcile how you can retain that ambitious target and yet reduce the targets for the number of children who will be living in poverty in this country.
Yeah, so we're constantly adjusting. So the employment initiatives investment framework allows decisions to be made based on what's working more effectively, what we're seeing in terms of where the need is, and the ability to adjust it. And that's what we'll continue to do.
Can I ask MSD for the revised targets? Because you've said they'll be revised into the 24-25, but you haven't stated what they are in the report.
We can get them to you when they're completed.
Yeah.
Any question?
Thank you. Is it acceptable that 1 in 4 people don't have their benefit entitlements accurately assessed, resulting in potentially them getting less than what they should and then struggling even more, or being overpaid and then slapped with an overpayment that
Yeah, so I accept it's challenging. It has been a problem for many years, getting that accurate entitlement. And, you know, quite frankly, the MSD continue to work on that. Overpayments is particularly challenging. I think in terms of where we're heading with Te Pai Tawhiti and the transformation program that I will be seeking budget approval for will actually improve the accuracy and reduce the amount of overpayments. Because I know how incredibly stressful it is, particularly if somebody's work hours are irregular and the benefits paid, it's resulted in an overpayment, they then get a debt. So absolutely there's more work to do to improve the accuracy. And I'm really confident that with the Te Pai Tawhiti program, we will be far more accurate in terms of those payments.
And with benefit sanctions being now at the highest level in 6 years, what's the accuracy when it comes to how those sanctions are applied? Are you confident that 100% of the sanctions that are applied were accurately put on people?
Yeah, so the feedback from frontline's been really
What's
positive.
the percentage?
Well, at the moment, 98% are at green. And what we're finding...
Sorry, no question, just to clarify, just for sake of time, what's the accuracy rate of sanctions? So like we know that 1 in 4 people don't have their benefit entitlements accurately assessed.
Yeah.
Can I ask how accurate is the sanction regime?
Well, and as I was going to say, so 98% are at green, 0.6% are at orange. When they're at orange, that is the conversation where if for some reason it is not accurate, that is the opportunity for the person to then say, well, actually the information you have is wrong. I don't have
what
data
is your
in front
margin
me in
of
terms
error?
what that correction is, but I'm very pleased that it's only 0.6% that are at orange. That is the window for a job seeker and MSD to then clarify if there has been any change.
And sorry, so second stop. Advocates on the ground have told us time and time again that whenever a sanction is applied, they often are able to overturn it because it has been wrongfully applied. How can you be confident that your sanction regime is actually doing what it's intended to do when you don't even know if those sanctions are applied accurately? And we know that 1 in 4 people don't have their benefit entitlements accurately assessed.
Yeah, I think there's two separate issues. So in terms of...
Well, there seems to be an issue with work and income's ability to accurately assess benefit entitlements and sanctions as well.
Well, they're two different things. One is where there is an obligation that exists, work obligation for having a CV, applying for positions, going to a job interview, accepting a job that is on offer. All of those work obligations are all about improving someone's chance to get a job. And as I said, we have a small number that are at orange, 0.6%, which I think is really encouraging. That is the opportunity for the person who's receiving the benefit to have a conversation with the staff at MSD, and if there is any issue, that's when it's raised. So I actually think the system is working because there is the opportunity for a conversation.
You're telling us you don't know.
Supplementary, Carmel. Yeah, so there were 2 points covered in Ricardo's speech. If it's okay, I'll ask a quick one to each. So the first was around timeliness and accuracy. The annual report puts it down to people not showing up with the right paperwork, which has always been an issue. I want to put to the Minister that and ask actually, are there staffing capacity issues, which are therefore creating issues with them being able to check the paperwork, to follow up with clients, and therefore leading to decreasing levels of timeliness and accuracy?
No, because we have, clearly protected the front line, and you would be well aware that in terms of having a target, I want more of the front line's conversations to be with those on benefit about work conversations, how they take the steps to get them closer to employment, and there hasn't been a reduction in the front line staff.
Last supplementary.
I can also sit there and tell you this. I had on one situation, I had to reprove my IRD number because the case manager was using, well, you could have gone bankrupt since we last dealt with you. And that is the only time in New Zealand that an individual would have their IRD number reissued is at bankruptcy. I'm pretty sure most people would know that they were made bankrupt, considering you have to appear in the High Court for it. But these are, this was a problem at Winslow Levin at one stage, was that they would re-ask for the IRD number for proof of it, just so that you can prove your IRD number, which doesn't typically change except if you're made bankrupt. And how many people get made bankrupt per year would not justify a broad brush check of everyone's IRD numbers.
I just find it astonishing that she's dancing around the questions.
I mean, also, like, this is, so under the previous national government, sanctions that were challenged for misappointments were overturned at a very, it was something like 80%. So of people who challenged their sanctions of being wrongly issued were overturned at an 80% rate, approximately. No judgment in our court system meets that factor. So, and the thing is, sanctions have gone up. But how often are sanctions willy-nilly applied, such as sanction now, ask questions later? When reality land is, you might be sanctioning someone in a coma.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing. She's going on and on about 0.6 people. And I was like, okay, I'm pretty sure Ricardo was trying to ask, hey, what's your margin of error? How accurate is your traffic light ice block system or whatever the fuck you've got? And she's just like, well, 80% and 0.6%. It's like, that's not the question. You're not answering the question. Yeah, I would just lose my shit if I was in that room.
Yeah.
So for me, this is one of the issues that amps me up like a lot, right? I mean, like it's tough enough being a disabled person anyway, right? You know, everyone knows this, right? Like it's not an easy life anyway. You know, like I know this, like everyone on this call knows this. You know, like I've lived with this my whole life. Everyone else has, and you know, it doesn't help having a government punching down on us right now and making it tougher anyway.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things I'm pushing for right now and really working quite hard on is to try and make equalize out the cost that we face, you know, just to walk out of our doors, you know, and to live in the world that's pretty disabling anyway. So I'm starting to think quite a lot about something called the cost of disability. And that's the thing that we actually just face every day as disabled people to live in a disabling world. And that's something that I would really like to see go on top of all of the benefits that many of us have to live on in order to just survive. Because we know that 50% of disabled people, at least 50%, are on the job seeker benefit.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's something I'd really like to see, that at least a top up goes on there, just to help, you know, at least the 50% of people on job seeker.
And here's something that has been brought up about how putting half a benefit on a payment card as a sanction is funny, because landlords will not have their rent getting paid. And because, you know, in many cases, people are paying more than 50% of their weekly income on rent. You know, which, you know, the recommendation is 25%, but we know that that's not a reality. I mean, I can say that of my personal income, more than 50% is paid on rent. You know, that has been a reality of my situation. Majority of the time I've been running my business. And the only time that it wasn't like that would have been when I was working for BP. And that was when I was earning close to 40 grand a year, you know, not $25,000 a year.
I've always said that the people that know how to manage finances the best are the ones that have been on the benefit, because they are absolutely pushed to the limit.
Yeah. They don't have to somehow balance that checkbook.
Yeah.
I know we're out of time, Sam, so if you want me to come back and finish this tomorrow, we can do that.
Oh, yeah, no. I think we'll call it quits on that one. Okay, so let's get to the fun part. The bills that are coming up for... actually, just a moment while I check the run sheet, just because I think there's... the Statutes of Limitations bill actually is no longer there. The Child Protection one is... gone. Okay, the oversight into the old Elvy Tamariki Systems Amendment Bill closes tomorrow tomorrow. The Response to Abuse and Care Amendment Bill closes on the 11th. The Evidence of Giving Family Violence Amendment Bill closes on Thursday the 19th, last day of Parliament. The Police Vetting Amendment Bill also closes on the 19th. The Victims of Sexual Violence Strengthening Amendment Bill closes also on 19th, last day of Parliament. And the Mental Health Bill closes on the 20th of December. And for Christmas, you start writing out your submissions on the Treaty Principles Bill. And the Elvy Tamariki Responding to Serious Youth Offenders Bill, which I think is the one to bring back physical force and punishment to lead to a bunch of future people to be abused in the future. So for those who have to go, I'm going to have to sit there and get going because I've got a paper run to do tomorrow morning. So as some of you probably know, get up at 3 a.m. in the morning and throw papers out the window for 3 hours. So we'll sit there and go for there. So thanks to all the audience for joining us tonight. We'll be back here tomorrow at 8 p.m. to sit and see more of what happened at Scrutiny Week. This week while Parliament was in recess. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you all tomorrow. Have a good evening.
Thank you for watching the Order Paper, your express ticket to the New Zealand House of Representatives. Every episode, we unravel the complex world of legislation, debate, and democracy. From bills to select committees, we've got it all covered. From our team of political commentators who will dissect and explain what's happened so you can remain up to date on what's happened in the Aotearoa, New Zealand Parliament. To support our channel, you can become a Patreon member at patreon.com/It's in the Ballot. The Order Paper podcast is brought to you by It's in the Ballot Productions, live at 8 p.m. New Zealand Standard